Alright, with this video, I'm going to try to help a little bit more with assignment 1, specifically question 6, question maybe 8 a little, and then even into question 9 when we're talking about allocative efficiency. So if you look at 6, my previous video kind of explains how we read this, but I want to focus on part C. What is the firm's economic profit or loss in equilibrium? So the key to remember here is equilibrium is where the supply curve and the demand curve interact or intersect. Okay. In my last video, I told you that remember that the demand curve, another thing that we can call the demand curve, is a marginal benefit curve or a marginal utility curve, but it is kind of the relationship consumers have between price, between quantity, the most that they're willing to pay for a good or service at various price levels. The marginal cost curve, right? The marginal cost curve is essentially the supply curve. So if you look at this graph, if this is the supply curve and this is the demand curve, where those intersect is right here at a price of 8 and an output of 130. So if this market, in a perfectly competitive market structure, the market would gravitate towards equilibrium, and we would see an output of 8, at a price of 8, we'd see an output of 130. However, this is for monopoly, and monopolies operate a little bit differently. Remember that the demand curve would be our marginal revenue curve in perfect competition. Well, in monopoly, it's not. Remember, the marginal revenue curve falls below the demand curve because in order to sell an additional unit, we have to lower the price of all goods or services. So our marginal revenue curve is going to fall below the demand curve in monopoly. So you see here in this example where the marginal revenue and marginal cost curve intersect. This is the output. 100 units, this is the output that's going to take place in a monopoly. 130 in perfect competition, 100 in monopoly. I hope that kind of makes sense, where these last 30 units in a monopoly situation or a monopoly market won't even get produced because they're not going to be profitable for a monopolist who controls the entire supply curve and thus gets to service or provide for the market demand curve. So if you look at profit, what's the firm's economic profit or loss in equilibrium? If you come here, right, here is equilibrium, price of 8, quantity of 130. Well, remember, profit is the difference between our costs and our revenue. Okay, so our total revenue would be 8 times 130. That would be our total revenue. And our average cost curve, so we come down here and we can see that our average costs are at 7. So if we come up at 130, we hit the average cost curve, and that's at 7. So our average cost per unit is $7. Our average revenue, demand, price, always equal to average revenue. Our average revenue is 8. So the difference between that, right, which is in this case $1, is going to be our profit or loss. But in this case, it's $1 greater, right? Costs are 7, revenue is 8, so we're making $1 per unit. And you can see that, and that's an equilibrium. So there's a small profit of $1 per unit in perfect competition in equilibrium. A monopoly is going to operate, okay, the monopolist is going to operate here where the marginal revenue curve at an output of 100, but now you go all the way up to the demand curve to hit the price, 100 at a price of 10. Now here's the difference. You come down and you hit the average cost or average total cost curve. And now this difference here is going to be your difference. You're making a little bit over $2. The monopolist is making $2 per unit versus the firm in perfect competition. Okay, so hopefully, well, I kind of answered those questions for you, but it's more important that you are able to read that graph. So when you come here, you're able to kind of see the same thing. I got an example here in front of me So whether this is for monopoly, oligopoly, or monopolistic competition, you can always come and find, okay, equilibrium. Remember, the marginal cost is the supply curve. Okay, the difference between your average total cost at that output. So my output in this situation would be X in perfect competition or at equilibrium. Okay, my costs are going to be at this level here. Okay, and we can just, let's just make a number up. We'll just say that's $4, where our output at X, whatever that output, we can make a number up. We'll just say 10. Okay, so I have 10. My average cost per unit is 4, so I have $40 of total cost. I come up and I hit the marginal cost equilibrium, and we'll just say that's a price of 5 just for fun. So you can see that my profit in equilibrium is that $1. Now, the monopolist or the oligopolist, where are they going to produce? That's where you come down and you find where the marginal cost curve hits the marginal revenue curve. So that, okay, is not going to be, it's going to be less. We'll just say that this is a 7 quantity. And we'll come up here, you hit the demand curve and at a price of 6. Okay, so marginal revenue curve, this is the output level, and then you got to go up to the demand curve to find the price. In this case, it's 6. We hit our average total cost right at about 4 there. So the monopolist is making another $1 per unit. So this would be the profit of the monopolist. This would be the profit of the perfect competitive firm. Okay, and we talk about a loss in output or allocative efficiency. These goods right here, okay, the difference between B and X, or in 7 and 10, these three in a monopoly go underproduced, where that's kind of the benefit of competition. All of this, right, this consumer surplus, the difference between what consumers, that essentially goes away. And this is what we call deadweight loss. We're not going to get into deadweight loss. We don't have time this year, but that kind of helps illustrate your question here of what is the problem with monopoly? Compare monopoly to benchmark of perfect competition. Well, if you can kind of compare it here, goods have a higher price and not as many are produced, right? Goods are underproduced for what the market is demanding in equilibrium. Goods are underproduced and they are more expensive. So that's kind of the difference between monopoly and perfect competition, thus why our government tends to look down upon monopolies other than those that are naturally occurring through economies of scale. So hope that helps.